Today, we're going to be looking at another best games of all time list, but this list was made in the year 2000, and as such, it only includes games from 1999 and earlier, a top 100 best games of the 20th century, if you will. This list comes from GameSpot, a gaming website that you may be familiar with as they still operate today. The interesting thing about this list is that it was specifically made by GameSpot UK, the United Kingdom version of the site. One really interesting thing about gaming discourse that I think is frequently overlooked is the cultural differences between countries. Games experience different levels of popularity and impact depending on which regions they're released in, so it'll be interesting to see how this GameSpot UK list differs from, say, an American list. I'll only be looking at the top 20 games on this list, so go check out the site for yourself to see if your favorite game made the list. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road. At number 20, we have Half-Life. You really can't go wrong here. It's a solid FPS game with a cool sci-fi horror movie setting that still makes the game tense to play even to this day. The game is still pretty interesting all these years later thanks to its use of platforming and puzzle solving. Yeah, good game. At number 19, we actually have two games, Myst and the game's sequel, Riven. So GameSpot actually decided to occasionally include multiple games in a game series on this list as opposed to a single game. Now, I do understand why they might have done something like this. You probably don't want like 10 spots on this list dedicated to just Mario or Zelda games, which tends to happen on a lot of these lists when you have consistently good franchises. However, I also think handling a list like this is kind of a cop-out. If you really wanted to avoid clogging your list up with multiple games in a series, just pick the best one in the franchise and leave it at that. Anyways, Myst. So I played this game for a bit and I quickly realized that this game is not for me. It's a slower paced, cryptic adventure game with a lot of puzzles to solve. It's very open-ended and it requires you to figure out a lot of stuff on your own with little help. Who knows, maybe I'm just a young dumb gamer who can't use my brain, but this one just didn't click for me. I haven't tried Riven, so maybe that one's a bit better. At number 18, we have International Cricket Captain 1 and 2. Okay, to be honest, I have no idea what International Cricket Captain is. I guess that's the UK flavor showing in this list. From what I'm aware, these are management games like the Football Manager series, but for cricket. Definitely not what I was expecting to see on this list, but hey, I like the variety. At number 17, we have Metal Gear Solid. Now, this is a game I can talk about. Metal Gear Solid was really interesting for a lot of reasons. You've got a surprisingly mature story about the struggles of war and how it affects the people involved. Then you've also got the impressive cinematography that wouldn't be out of place in an action movie. Plus, you've got the emphasis on stealth instead of combat, which just wasn't super common back then. And to top it all off, you've got the game's surprisingly fun sense of humor that keeps the experience grounded. Graphically, it definitely looks like a PS1 game, but besides that, it still holds up well. At number 16, we have Soul Calibur. I love what the GameSpot page said about this game. Soul Calibur is one of the principal reasons to buy Sega's new console, the Dreamcast. Do you guys remember a time when the Dreamcast was new? Were you guys even alive when the Dreamcast was still being made? The GameSpot page also praised Soul Calibur for running at a blazing 60 frames per second. Now, to be fair, the UK got the PAL versions of retro games, and these versions often did run at a slower frame rate because of the differences in the way video signals worked in different regions. Unfortunately, like a lot of fighting games, the older entries in the Soul Calibur series are quite difficult to get your hands on. The first two games in the series were re-released on a few platforms in HD, but they've since been delisted. I don't have much experience with this game series either, so not much I can say here, unfortunately. At number 15, we have the entire FIFA series. At least the games from FIFA 96 to the latest game at the time, FIFA 2000. At this time, the FIFA series was a heck of a lot smaller, but even then it was still really popular. FIFA isn't even called FIFA anymore, it's called EA Sports FC, so this makes this list even more of a time capsule. Sports game series are well known for making very few changes to the games across each yearly release, so it actually does make more sense to include an entire series here as opposed to one game. Unfortunately, it's hard to play these old FIFA games now because sports games are notoriously not well preserved by the companies that make them. I don't think there are any FIFA games on Steam that are older than 3 years old. It could be because of licensing why many of these games aren't available, but whatever the case may be, it is unfortunate. In any case, FIFA 2000 is neat. I love the fun little animations that play whenever you score a goal. Besides that, this isn't really the sort of game I particularly care for. At number 14, we have EverQuest. The GameSpot page called this game a MUD, an acronym which apparently stands for Multi-User Dungeon. Nowadays, people just call these games MMORPGs, massively multiplayer online role-playing games. The page says that Ultima Online holds the honor of being the biggest one of these sorts of games, which is funny since this was a time before World of Warcraft even existed. Personally, Personally, I haven't played this one. I'm just not really a big MMORPG guy, so on to the next one, I guess. At number 13, we have Populous 1 and 2. Populous is a game where you play as a sort of make-believe deity who manipulates the world to grow the power of your followers. You then use your followers to fight the followers of another being until one of you comes out on top. It's essentially a war strategy game. The second game is similar to the first one, but with better visuals and more features. They're definitely interesting little games. At number 12, we have Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo has become a staple of the racing game genre, and it all started back on the PS1. Aside from allowing you to use real-world cars in the games, the series is well known for its fantastic music. Unfortunately, the US and European versions of the game got the worst of the two soundtracks, because that was back in the day when games would occasionally have considerably different soundtracks across different regions. However, both soundtracks are still great. One of the biggest appeals of the Gran Turismo series is the visual quality. When a new Gran Turismo game came out, it probably looked really good, and acted as a nice showcase of what the PlayStation console it came out on was capable of. Obviously, the original Gran Turismo is not widening any eyeballs today with its graphics, and even back then, arcade racing game graphics were far better, but for a PS1 game in 1997, you can't deny its visuals are impressive. And of course, gameplay-wise, it's still a fun racing game to just throw on for a few minutes in the arcade mode, or get immersed in your own journey in the simulation mode where you have to earn licenses to participate in races to get money to afford even better cars. At number 11, we have Elite. Elite is a surprisingly overlooked game for how impressive it was for its time. Before GTA 3 and The Legend of Zelda defined the future of open-world games, Elite was released back in 1984. In the game, you play as a space pilot who travels around the cosmos where you can do things like visiting new planets, hunting down ships, and even stealing stuff to fatten up your wallet. It's a surprisingly deep game as you have to deal with things like conserving fuel, the laws of each place you visit, and the various other ships out there that are doing their own thing. Elite is definitely an innovative title. I wish I could enjoy this game a bit more, but I couldn't really get used to the controls on the keyboard. This sort of game seems like it would work best with something like one of those classic flight joysticks. There's also quite a number of different button controls that you have to keep track of, which makes it hard to get into. Moving on to the top 10, at number 10, we have the entire Ultima mainline series. I don't know, including the whole series, even the MMORPG just seems like cheating. Like, if you want to include the first Ultima for being an important early RPG and you want to include Ultima Online for being a big MMO, that's fine, but goodness, they started off the top 10 with 10 plus games taking up a slot. I gave Ultima 4 a try because it's free on GOG. Ultima 4 is a really old RPG. I mean really old. It's older than Final Fantasy, Megami Tensei, and even Dragon Quest. Like a lot of old RPGs, Ultima 4 doesn't hold your hand. If you want to figure out what to do, you either gotta just wing it and hope you figure it out, look up a guide, or sit and read a really long manual. I was stuck on the title screen for like 10 minutes because I didn't even know what button to press to start the game. Upon reading the manual, you see that you have to press the I key. I don't know why they couldn't have just put a prompt on the screen that says press I to start. Game design really was different back then. 5 minutes in and the game tells me to go read a book. No, literally, it tells you to stop playing the game and go read a 36-page book included with the game called The History of Britannia that goes over various different parts of the game's history and lore. Sorry, I just don't think this game is my cup of tea. I could definitely see someone liking this game if you do like to get engrossed into lore and discover things by yourself. I did legitimately put about an hour into this game, but it's just not something I feel like putting a ton of time into. Maybe I'll give some of the later games a try at some point. At number 9, we have the entire Tomb Raider series up to that point. Tomb Raider really did make an immediate impact on the scene for a multitude of reasons. Aside from the game's main character Lara Croft exposing a bunch of teenage boys to the tantalizing power of triangles, Tomb Raider is still worth remembering as a landmark early 3D platformer. Keep in mind, this game came out the same year as Crash Bandicoot and Super Mario 64. I find it funny that in my mind I always think of Tomb Raider as a PlayStation game, but Tomb Raider was originally released first on the Sega Saturn. So while the Saturn didn't even have a prominent new Sonic 3D platformer to compete with Mario on Nintendo and Crash on PlayStation, it did have Tomb Raider. Personally, I think Tomb Raider is the worst of this trio though. The controls aren't good at all. It uses the tank control scheme that some old 3D games like Resident Evil use. Turning corners is annoying, making precise movements is a nightmare thanks to how far Laura moves just by barely touching the D-pad, and the poor camera doesn't make things any better. Unfortunately, all 3 of the old Tomb Raider games have these problems. However, Tomb Raider's influence can be seen on big action-adventure game franchises like Assassin's Creed and Uncharted, and Lara Croft has become one of the most iconic women in gaming, if not the most, so Tomb Raider's legacy can't be understated. At number 8, we have Super Mario World. Wow, I can't believe it took us until this far in the top top 20 to get a Nintendo game. But yeah, Super Mario World is a game I've talked about plenty on this channel. Still a great 2D platformer with good visuals, music, and level design. Not to mention the replay value thanks to its abundance of secrets. I'm surprised, in a list with a bunch of entries being entire series, they just stuck with Super Mario World here instead of the entire Mario franchise. At number 7, we have SimCity. Nowadays, sim games where you build a city or manage a business or take care of a farm are a dime a dozen. But SimCity was one of the pioneers way back in 1989. It's a really novel idea that at first seems boring. You're just building and managing a city, but you constantly want to improve your town and see it get bigger and more optimized, making you want to come back and play it again. At number 6, we have Microsoft Flight Simulator. Like Elite, I think this game is probably meant to be played on a joystick, so I can't really talk too much about it. Also, like Elite and a lot of other old sim games, I find Microsoft Flight Sim to have a bit too much going on in the UI department, and it seems a bit difficult for new players to get into, but maybe you might find some enjoyment with it. Moving on to the top 5. At number 5, we have Championship Manager 3. It's another manager game. I can definitely feel a bias on this list. And it's another soccer related game as well, which isn't surprising given that this is a UK list. It is interesting that a management game ranked higher than the games where you actually play the sport. But hey, it's their list, not mine. I personally never played this game, so can't really say too much about it. At number 4, we have the entire Legend of Zelda series, although the page only really talks about the original game on the NES and Ocarina of Time, which was a little over a year old when this list came out. I love how they say that Ocarina of Time is a textbook example of retro done right. It's weird to think about a time when Ocarina of Time was a new game. I also love how they say that graphically Ocarina of Time is simply unmatched. Man, have standards changed. But yeah, Zelda in general is pretty good. At number 3, we have Command & Conquer, Command & Conquer Red Alert, and Command & Conquer Tiberian Sun. These Command & Conquer games are real-time strategy games where you develop resources to fight against other armies. It's interesting how many PC games were included in the top 20 compared to some other ones I've seen, which are far more console dominant. I wish I had more to say here, but I haven't played these. At number 2, we have Doom. Doom is of course id Software's FPS classic, and it's not too surprising this is on here. It helped popularize the first-person shooter genre, and it holds up pretty well too. Back when this list came out, the game was only about 7 years old, so definitely an older title, but not even considered retro yet. However, it's cool to know that even back then it was considered an all-time classic. And finally, at number 1, we have Civilization 1 and 2. Unfortunately, neither of these games have been re-released on any modern storefront to my knowledge, so it'll be difficult to play these games if you don't have them already. Fortunately, Civilization is one of those franchises where despite noticeable differences, you kinda get the same idea behind it no matter which game you play. These are strategy games where you start a new civilization and your goal is to become the greatest nation in the world by strengthening your civilization through discoveries in science, technology, and military might. You can choose to be peaceful with other nations or attempt to conquer the world. The fact that these games use real-life civilizations and political figures can lead to some really surprising moments. I definitely was not expecting this franchise to be the number 1 best game of all time before the year 2000, but to be honest, I do like the variety. Not every list has to be dominated by the same old stuff like Final Fantasy and Metroid. But yeah, that's the list. It seems like the people who made this list definitely enjoyed old PC strategy and simulation games. I definitely will try to go back and play a lot of these PC games that were on the list, at least the ones that I can get my hands on. Obviously, these aren't my personal best games of all time, but everyone's list is going to be different. I like to judge lists by how they justify putting certain games on the list instead of others, and the metrics by which they use to rank the games. The GameSpot page said that it factored in things like impact, fun factor, and innovation, which is pretty standard. My only major complaint is that it definitely was an odd choice to include an entire series of games for some entries on this list. It feels a lot like cheating, even if I do understand it in some cases. With all of that being said, thanks for watching y'all, and have a great rest of your day.